Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to this show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle, first of all, it's an African-centered talk show. And what I mean by African-centered, it is centered on we who consider ourselves African descendants in America, descendants of those enslaved people who were involuntarily brought here into this country. There's a perspective and a worldview that sometimes get missed in the generality of the news media, how we perceive the politics or the everyday lives of people of African descent. And I always speak from that perspective, especially in things that are daily occurrences that can be found in the news media. We are made up of many different ethnic groups in this country. We are still considered a kind of experiment that was never seen in the world, maybe on a few occasions in history, going to the Greeks, when we talk about this democratic system. At the time of the founding of this country, it's been in Europe and other parts of the world, there were either kings and queens and emperors. There was a middle class, not a middle class, royalty class, and then a big gap in wealth, and then there was the peasant class. There might some semblance of a middle class with the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, but prior to that, if you were not part of the royal class, you didn't have much say in government. And this experiment that was established in 1789 with the ratification of the Constitution gave certain powers to people who hold the title of citizens in this country. But that's what we're going to be talking about. This is still about a month after the midterm elections in the second year of the reign of the person who now occupies the White House, Donald J. Trump. And I'm going to talk about an aspect of this political process that still, even though there have been some gains in we're in the 21st century, over 100 years going back to the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, and the struggle for voting rights, especially people of African descent and other people of color. I'm talking about Native Americans, people of Mexican American heritage, and other people from Latin America and places like that. And it has been a struggle since the beginning of this country. There have been some gains. Actually, there's been some laws that were passed, but getting those laws to be consistently applied to those people, even a simple thing like voting, has been a constant problem in this country. For example, for 399 years, the white majority in this country, and I'm not dogging the white majority, I'm just a historical fact that this system, even though it was established for all men as found in our, what I would like to call our founding document, or the ideas, or the mission statement of this country, I always use the Declaration of Independence as the mission statement. Okay, we said all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator, with inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are nice words written by a gentleman, Thomas Jefferson, who happened to hold in bondage 230 human beings in order to maintain his lifestyle. Okay, he was a slaveholder. So there was a constant contradiction of what is being said and what is being written about and what is part of the historical narrative that we're constantly told from the time we are little children, born into this system or coming here from other places and gaining our citizenship. That has been the dialogue and the national mythology of America. People of African descent, brown, red, yellow people who are from various different ethnic groups in this country, we know the reality of what is said, what is written by law, and how it is applied, which has been the issue with this concept of pursuit of happiness and this aspect of liberty, which is written into the founding statement or the mission statement. And in the case, when you talk about a mission statement, that is the mission of whatever the entity that is applying the reality to those words. We're still on a mission, even as far as 2018, in which I am talking to you right now. Okay, so for well over 240 or more years, the mission of people that look like me, that people that look like our Latino brothers and sisters, people who look like our red Native American, indigenous population here, we're still on a mission to achieve that, to make the system automatically functions in the way that carries out what those words indicate in the mission statement. The mission is still not there yet. There has been some progress, but there's also been some sliding. And the last election, this past November, especially in places like Florida, let me put up, Georgia, let's start with Georgia. There was a race between, for governor by state representative there, Stacey Abrams on the left, and you see the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brian Kemp, on the right. What made this race particularly interesting, and I'm using it as part of my dialogue about race and politics, is that the individual on the right, Brian Kemp there, he is the Secretary of State. And one of the jobs of the Secretary of State, especially the state of Georgia, by law, is to control the voting aspect of that, to make sure that people have equal right based on the 15th Amendment for people of African descent, which a lot of other groups have utilized to get their suffrage or voting rights, and to make it fair and equitable, make sure that every vote counts. But what this gentleman has been doing for the last, right out in the open it seems, now, not only is he the Secretary of State, which handles the voting in the state of Georgia, he is also the opponent of the Democrat Stacey Abrams, who would have been the first not only female but black female to hold the office of governor. Her policies would, according to during the campaign, she gathered unexpectedly. Nobody expected what she accomplished, but she gathered a lot of popularity, and not only within the state of Georgia, but nationally. And the policy that she was pushing would not just benefit people of African descent. Just because you're a black person running for office, you're just not she's not going to be just the governor. She would not have been just the governor of every black person in Georgia. She would have been the governor of everybody. And Georgia is one of those states that did not accept when Obamacare was put out. You know, it didn't there was some money that the federal government was going to give to Georgia so that they could expand health care to all Georgians which is one of the problems of all Americans is, you know, the problem of getting adequate health insurance. They would have expanded Medicaid and Medicare to majority of millions more Georgians, white and black, and all other groups in the lower middle class or poor will be getting health care. But the Republican Party, instead of supporting that, they use the issue of race to, let's say, gin up the white Southerners there who voted against their own interests. And this is a process that been happening all through the ex-Confederate states, let's just say, throughout the South, and places like Georgia. all the polls showed that she was in the lead, that more people would be, seem to be more interested, and all the exit surveys showed that her policies of expansion of health care for everybody, which would benefit the poor and middle class whites, and other policies that would benefit that group as governor. Uh, she would focus on education. She would focus on attracting other businesses to the state to show that a state like Georgia does not have the old type of stereotype of the redneck, anti-racist, ex-Confederate type of mythology, and that Georgia and places like Atlanta and other parts of Georgia would be looked at as a more progressive type of state. But regardless of all the things she said, most of a lot of the white people who voted for Kemp, who, as a Republican, offers nothing, as shown by the policies of the Republican Party for the last previous 8 years, even under the Obama administration, where they tried to get rid of health care that would benefit them, that showed that you have a system that functions more as a kleptocracy, in which only the elites will benefit from the policies that they put forth. Seeing all these things and how the Republican Party has, let's just say, shown to not have their best interest of the jobs are still being sent overseas. Money is, the only thing they passed was a tax reform that only benefits the upper 1% in 2017. That's going to raise the taxes of the average middle class white American in Georgia. They still went ahead and voted for Kemp because he focuses on the race, the thing that gins up that innate fear that somehow black people are taking over or brown people are taking over the power structure here, regardless of whether they're fellow Americans who are going to do them just as a good a job. And her policies, her articulations, her way she carries herself, her leadership did not mean a thing to a large portion of white Georgians who voted for Kemp, the man who suppressed votes. He actually took out of the voting rolls genuine, something like 500,000 registered voters, mostly black and Latino. He took them off the roll for various different, using various different voter suppression techniques. In plain sight, for the past 2 years, in anticipation that, and even was found and recorded that he feared that a lot more people would vote for the Democratic policies, which would mean that Stacey Abrams would win. But regardless of all that, he had to basically cheat. And he won the governor's race, and by a narrow margin. If all those folks had their vote counted, actually counted, instead of being expunged for various different racist reasons, we would have the first female governor and first black female governor of Georgia as we speak. But out of this, but ginning up the white fear, let me just repeat how this statement that I opened the show with. For 399 years, in 2019 will be the 400th anniversary of the landing in Jamestown, Virginia, of a Dutch man of war which carried about 20 enslaved, captured people of African descent. And from that time until this very time, there was slavery officially part of the American experience. All men are created equal. Isn't that what our mission statement is? But yet for majority of our time in this, as a corporate entity of government, we held people in bondage, contradicting the mission statement that exists and being ignored by this thing that I'll talk about later about what is called white privilege and where did that come from and how that affects how people think and how people vote in these elections and the work that still needs to be done to make sure that we live up to the mission statement uh, of those words in the Declaration of Independence. Um, this process, these tools that reinforces the message to people that look like me and brown people and red people, we know the deal. We've always known that this country does not work by what the mythology we're taught tells us because of our experience. You know, people like James Baldwin have said that unless you deal with the struggles of your reality, you will never grow in this country. In other words, you have to experience struggle to test your mettle. You have to experience struggle to understand, you know, what you're made of, what you can deal with. If you don't have this reality, you're not fully, truly grown. And for many people of European descent, based on this concept of white privilege, you know, which I know some people hear that term, especially people of European descent in this country, and they cringe. But it's not because it is not a truth. It's because they're not ready to hear the truth. Because that same system of white privilege gave them the opportunity to be oblivious to the reality that is found by other groups in this country. That's one of the side effects of white privilege, is that the system, whether you are the top of the social economic strata of this society or you're at the bottom of the social economic stratus of this society, if you are white, you are another tier. There's a two-tier system, okay? There's a two-tier system, one white and then one black and others, other people of colors on the second tier. So when you hear a person of European descent that says that my father was a poor sharecropper, or what he didn't own slaves, my great grandfather didn't own slaves, that might be true. But you were still convinced by the system that you had the opportunity to make it to a higher level. And there are certain historical facts that showed that. But you do not know that there were certain things put in place, certain laws put in place that gave you, just by the color of your skin, the ability to at least have the opportunity to make it out of poverty. If you, you know, grab yourself by the bootstraps and do what you need to do. But the reason you are allowed to do that, the same technique, the same thing that Donald Trump is promising most of these people, or the Republicans who are campaigning like Kemp, who are saying that they're going to do your taxes and help you achieve. Those are nice words, but the reality is another thing. There's another race that proves my point. I talked about Georgia, but there's Florida. Okay, and you had this race for governor of the state of Florida. And you have on your right Ron DeSantis, and you had Andrew Gillum. On the left, Ron DeSantis, on the right, Andrew Gillum. And the same issue came about. The Republican and the apparatus around them, you know, disenfranchised a lot didn't work towards helping the voting system work. He was a congressman. He was up there in Washington. Florida since 2000 had problems with their system of voting, and nothing was done to improve it because it benefited the Republican Party. Now, this system that happened in Florida and happened in Georgia, I want to put up a map on the next up on the screen. As you can see there, it says that in American politics, there's a term called the Southern strategy, which referred to Nixon. And this is talking about Richard Nixon, 1968. And the Republican Party was an electoral strategy during the 1968 presidential election to increase support among white voters in the South by appealing to white Southern racial grievances in order to gain their support. And it worked. It's still working. That's my point. Now, this is 1968. Actually goes back even further, okay, going back even to colonial times. It was always the white elites who got the poor whites when they started seeing that they were in the same conditions as Native Americans and blacks when it comes to the wealth disparity, when it came to the way they were treated in the society, and they started working amongst with them. Back in colonial times, you had things like the Bacon Rebellion, where there were blacks and whites who were upset with how the system was treating them. Now, the elites, and this is the same, again, what we're seeing with Trump and the Republicans in 2018 is nothing new. There's always been a system of, the Southern strategy in some form or the other. It just got its name. The next person that we're going to see his name is Kevin Phillips. He wrote a book called The Emerging Republican Majority. And this book, and Kevin Phillips, that's the younger version of himself, and the older version of himself, is a tribute to the tactics that came out of ignoring the black votes and focusing totally on the whites in the South, which has also expanded in the last 40 years to other parts of this country. He made a quote in the next image that come up, in which he says, from now on, the Republicans are never going to get more than 10 or 20% of the Negro votes. And they don't need that any more than that, okay? But Republicans will be short-sighted if they weaken, at that time, the 1968 Voting Rights Act. The more Negroes who register as Democrats in the South will make what he called the Negrophobes, and that's white Southerners, will quit the Democratic Party and become Republicans. And if you read the rest of it, that's where the votes are. Without that prodding from the blacks, the whites will backslide into their old comfortable arrangement with the local Democrats. So anybody today who come up with this idea that the Democrats, were the old Confederacy and all that, well, they really don't understand history, that since Goldwater and with people and Nixon and Kevin Phillips and his strategy of the Southern strategy, in which they knew they would ignore most of the black vote, okay, and Latino vote. They wasn't even interested in that. They focused solely on ginning up the Southern whites. And they used the Voting Rights Act, in which, and people of African descent, I always say that we know the system. We understand the trauma that we're not stupid. We're always being white-splained. Why are you dealing with the Democrats? And we deal with whoever has the best policy that benefit us. We know that we experienced what was going on in the South in the 1960s. We understand that the Republicans, even though they were the party of Lincoln 100 years earlier, by the time the 1960s and 1940s, at least the 48, when some version of the Southern strategy was used, where and then the Brown versus the Board of Education, you start seeing all these different social changes coming along. We understood that the Republican Party, all the Dixiecrats went to the Republican Party. All the racists went to the Republican Party. All the people that saw all these black folks voting and started voting Democratic, and then you had Lyndon Johnson with the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act and all these things that benefit black people, but it also benefit poor whites. But yet they just saw no further than the color of the skin, and they voted like they've been voting, and they were taught culturally to vote white, in what we call white supremacist ways. They don't think that they're voting against their own interests, because those same laws would help you. It doesn't care what color you are, but your social economic standing. And laws are how we get our rights as citizens to pursue our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But yet, because of this concept of racism that permeates some of our political system to this very day, we're still finding that since colonial times, they've been manipulating poor whites to vote, do things against their own interests, pointing at black people. Now we're pointing at poor people coming from South America under the Trump administration to produce laws that does not help them but helps the elite. It's always been that game, and white Americans are still doing that, as you can see from what would happen in Georgia, what happened in Florida. And I'm going to continue this discussion, like always, time goes by quickly when you're having fun, but I want to make you understand that this system still needs work. This is not a post-racial society, that people were saying after President Obama came into office in 2008. It's always, always been that way. We still got things to do, but I'll continue on the next show. So until then, peace, hotep, bye-bye.